Here we go. I love algae.
Okay, so I have a couple visit pictures. These are German soldiers since 1918. And you'll notice the helmets. Helmets had helmets before. You see medieval knights with helmets, but helmets were basically, they got rid of them. As seen, it's heavy and unnecessary, but they brought them back. This is the first modern helmet. Every helmet today copies this helmet, German 1916 helmet, to this day. The United States would basically adopt this helmet in 1980. They called them Fritzes for a long time in the US, which I find kind of amusing. You notice something else? See the gas mask? I think, no, they're posing. This is not a picture from actual battle, but you might know something else that the look of them, does that remind you of anybody, German soldier with a gas mask? German soldier and horses with gas masks. Not for the eyes, and the mustard gas would just rot their eye, would burn their eyes out. Mustard gas is corrosive, and when it gets on your skin, it starts to eat away the skin. And you think how bad that'd be on your skin, just imagine what that does to us. For example, in World War I, Hitler would be behind the lines with blinding them hospital. Example, I think it was a World War I hero for Germany. But back to this. You ever seen Darth Vader? Gee, I wonder who copied that. That George Lucas copied German World War I soldiers. And stormtroopers was a name for German crack troops that both shock troops to attack the trenches in 1917, 1918 were called stormtroopers. He really took a lot from Germany, World War I. And this was an era where there was a lot of posters. It was really a lot of maps. They would do kind of these caricatures of all the different countries. There are thousands of them. You would not believe how many there are. But this one always makes me laugh because of how funny, like Italy or Britain works. Norway or the Netherlands, but Sweden, Russia with the bayonet in the nose and a rifle in the mouth. Nobody like Serbia. Do you catch it? The pig. Serbia is considered kind of a pariah, and I like Corsica. Or not like a Germany armed up against France with the pistol, and that's Belgium, armed right at the heart of France. And so I like these maps, but there are so many of them. And the thing you have to understand about this era, there was a feeling that war was coming. They all talked about it. There's this massive arms race. Remember that talk I told you about revolution and the fear of revolution. And so let's get to the factors of that war. I got a little bit of World War I history because it's got to make sense. So, number one, industrialization. Industrialization. And we talked about all the issues that are happening with the United States at the same time. So it began in Britain, then the United States, and then everybody else was forced to catch up unequally, and you're going to get massive inequalities. Not just inequalities of wealth, which we've talked about how wealth focuses because those who have the capital get the profit. And you really see this in some of these countries that industrialized later, where they had those who already had the money were allowed to basically monopolize the capital. But you see it also in countries. So Britain, and to a lesser degree, France, they had been industrial revolution for a while, and so they were becoming quite rich. Germany had industrialized so fast that it passed Britain and was becoming incredibly rich. And then you have a country like Russia that was trying to industrialize unequally. It led to vast inequalities, the feeling that the haves, or I'm sorry, the have-nots are going to fight back, whether it be revolution or nations. And the growth of socialism and a form of socialism called communism. So have these socialist parties, the largest socialist party in the world is going to be in Germany. It's also going to have the most pro-monarchy party in the world too. Germany will be the most dynamic country you could imagine. Just this shifty, turbulent country where 1 million people will come out and march on May Day, which was International Workers' Day, every place else in the world except for the US. And then a month later, as in an anniversary of the emperor's coronation, 1 million people will march for the king. And there's just this feeling that anarchy, or I'm sorry, that revolution was going to happen, especially with all the anarchist attacks. Remember, the president of the United States was assassinated by anarchists less than 14 years before the war, 13 years before the war began. By the way, that's Manchester in England, North England. And so they talked about all the time that Armageddon's coming, or the apocalypse, Armageddon. We're going to flush out all the rot in society. It just had that feeling everywhere, not just the United States, especially when the whole country or the whole world's an armed camp. So that's the first thing. The second big thing, you have all these old monarchies. I picked 17th century just simply because that's the first time you start getting more modern nation states, modern tax systems. Total capitalism is developing. You won't really have capitalism to the Industrial Revolution. But you have this new and changing, a dynamic world with people living in different ways, totally different expectations of life. This new and the old desperately trying to hold on to what they have. Desperately. And so with that, this kind of personifies some of the many problems with the old monarchy. Everybody in that picture is related to the woman in the middle, Queen Victoria. This is at her diamond or 60th anniversary of being queen. And here, all these people, these are royal families all over Europe, and they're all related to her. By the way, she carries this gene called the gene for hemophilia. You might have heard of that. It might have some issue down the road. Yes. I'll get to it in a second. And so with that, all these people are related. So for example, her niece married Queen Victoria's niece, married Queen Victoria's cousin. They're all inbred. These are monarchs. These are a bunch of inbred, so they're all spreading this gene. And who's the cousin? That's Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. Her nephew is Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. And so they're all interrelated. Here is the Prince of Wales, her son. He would die relatively young, go to King George, and like the same guy right here. They're all related. The best example of the problem with this is the problem with having these kind of inbred and mercurial leaders would be the Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. Now, there is a Reichstag or parliament in Germany, but the emperor still has immense power over the military and the head of state. And his dad, and keeping in the tradition of all monarchs, he hated his dad, and his dad hated his dad, and so on and so on. It's very difficult to be the son of royalty. They don't really see you, and they hammer you with all these things, your responsibilities. But his dad died very young. He got throat cancer, was emperor for less than a year. And here's the Kaiser, emperor of Germany. And he was young, incredibly insecure, and desperate to prove himself. Can you see why? Can you see it? See it? He had a breech birth, and his arm got lodged behind his head and dislocated, and didn't know when he was a baby. So the arm is about 2/3 the size. The hand is about 2/3 the size of his other hand. Can't really do much with it. He could spend his whole life trying to compensate. So he always will be bent. You know, he has his suits tailored, uniforms tailored, so it looks like the same size. Always bent, so you can't tell if it's smaller. Usually holding something, so you can't really tell how small it is. Now, but when he's a young boy, his dad would hire tutors who would literally beat him without mercy to try to convince or to try to make him into this great warrior. He's the emperor of the country with the greatest military in the world. He's got to be a warrior. And he's going to spend his whole life compensating. The insecurities about them will always be where he's going to show his stuff. And he's especially going to show his stuff to Britain with the great navy. And I'll show my aunt and then my uncle this. And so, to give you an example, he would try to work his right arm to become as strong as humanly possible. To become strong as possible. And so he could compensate. And so he would chop wood with one hand. He'd have someone put the wood there, he'd chop with one hand. So he had a double-bladed axe, which had the axes, one arm. His right arm got very powerful. Give you an idea how insecure it was. When he would meet someone, he would reach out and he'd give the monarch kind of a limp handshake. He goes, yeah. And he'd grab their hand sometimes, just cuts and squeeze it so hard that they would go to their knee in agony. Sometimes even breaking bones, and then like hold a conversation while this person is kind of writhing in pain. That's not normal. And so the point is, now that gives you an idea about Germany. And many times they'll represent their leader, insecure, desperate to prove themselves, and they have the most powerful army in the world. Another example is our Nicholas II of Russia, the most autocratic, the most control of anybody. But he was this man who he knew from day one he wasn't going to be an emperor. When his father died, he was going to be emperor, the Tsar. All Tsar means is Caesar or emperor. That's all Kaiser means is emperor, Caesar. He was 19 and cried. And just because he knew he was not ready. But if you have an hereditary monarchy, you're stuck with what you get. That's one of the problems with hereditary. We're stuck with this inadequate man who really was totally ill prepared. Emotionally, he did not understand complicated matters, always pushed everything off to advisors. In fact, when he was told that his fleet was destroyed, remember I told you about the Russian fleet that sailed all the way around through the Russian-Japanese War? They got destroyed right here. He was playing tennis at their winter resort in Crimea. And he was playing tennis. And they came up and gave him the message that your fleet has been destroyed. We spent thousands of sailors were killed. He goes, thank you. Now, other thing is Russia needs a male heir. After Catherine the Great, it had been decreed in Russia that there must only be male heir. The male nobleman did not like Catherine the Great. And so he had 4 daughters and no son. He finally had a son, Alexis, but he had hemophilia. Okay, what's hemophilia? Yeah.
Platelets in your blood, clots in your stomach.
Yeah. So the blood won't clot, the blood won't, can't stop you bleeding, no platelets. And so a little cuts back. But what's really bad is a bruise, because that's internal. In fact, it's a small bruise. It would hurt so bad you couldn't even function. And sometimes that could kill it. Just bleed and bleed and bleed and swell up 3 or 4 times. And they kept that secret because the Tsar is supposed to be a god on earth, and how can you have a son with hemophilia? And so he was very much protected. And nobody knew that outside the royal family. They kept it secret. Yet after one horrible time where he fell, he would do things like climb fences. Hemophiliacs are really known for taking great risks because think about it, if you have hemophilia, if you're a kid, your parents are going to do what? Try to shelter you as much as possible, right? So what's going to happen? What are they going to want to do? Yeah, so they would catch him like climbing on the roof and things like that and going on fences because he was so desperate to do stuff. He fell off a fence and got a couple bruises and thought he was going to die. And a monk from Siberia by the name of Rasputin was brought in. He was said to have healing powers and they were desperate. And for some reason, it could have been just, almost certainly luck, but he felt better with Rasputin. The swelling went down. And you can imagine, especially his mom, the Tsarina, kept wanted Rasputin around. And nobody knew why Rasputin was there. And he would go out in St. Petersburg and drink more alcohol than anyone could ever drink, carouse. He became, all the Russian noblewomen just kind of followed him around because he thought he had great powers. And no one could understand why this seemingly horrible, immoral man was so close to the monarch. And he became a symbol of how the monarch was basically rotting or decaying. Rasputin is a great story. Maybe I'll tell you about how he died. But with that, this is an example of that. But let me give you one more picture of Tsar Nicholas II. And that's King George V. I mean, isn't that creepy? They're first cousins. Isn't that weird? Now, the King of England has relatively limited power, but the Tsar has almost autocratic full power. The last of the real autocratic monarchs. So let's get down to number 3, imperialism. Remember that quest for empire. And there's going to be constant wars for empire all the time. The United States just got done fighting wars for empire. And that whole idea about scooping up the resources, remember mercantilism. But then it became a lot more prestige. Look how big our empire is. And it's going to be a worldwide fight for empire. And which side has the biggest empire? In fact, pretty soon, they're not going to really be making a lot of money off it. They will squeeze as much as they can from the colonists. But for example, Queen Victoria was the Empress of India too. They gave her that title too. And look at Russia or look at Europe. Okay, this is pretty close to the way Europe looks today. Look at Eastern and Central Europe. There's no Poland. There's no Serbia, Croatia. This is all empires. And all these countries had just won their independence in the last 100 years from the Ottoman Empire. It says Poland here. Poland was part of what is now Poland, was Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia. You notice no Latvia, Lithuania, the poor Ukrainians don't have a country. It's just all these areas. And so this fight for empire, but this is best personified by Africa. In 1860, only a few places had been taken by Europeans. In the next 50 years, only 2 places in Africa were still independent. And one is a weird case. Ethiopia beat an Italian invasion in 1794. They were still independent. Ethiopia or Italy would attack them in the 1930s. Hey, remember Liberia? Remember the African Colonization Society and slavery, and then ship the slaves to Africa, the former slaves to Africa? Remember I told you about that with abolition? It seems so long ago. Yes. Well, Africa is going to be exploited a lot. And you really start seeing in this era, especially they could not match the technology. And look, by 1914, look how many places. This is red, that's British colonies, German. Portugal still had a few of the remnants of their first ship going around Africa in the 16th century. France, okay, a lot of this is desert, but France can say, look at our empire, it's huge. This massive era was given not to a country, but one man, King Leopold of Belgium. He committed some of the worst atrocities in humankind to get the rubber out of it. After he died in 1910 with the Belgium. But they're just scrambling and scooping it up. And the Kaiser would like to say, I want my place in the sun, a bigger empire. And so let's get to number 4. That ties right in with nationalism. Once you have imperialism, you're going to have wars all the time. You are going to have wars all the time. And so nationalism, all these different colors are different types or different ethnic groups. Now we know what nationalism. Nationalism is the idea of an intense love or devotion to your country. And why do you love your country in nationalism? Yeah, you might say reasons, but it's your country, that intense devotion to your state. But what about those areas that don't have a state? The United States, we get this surge of nationalism after the like Tippecanoe and then the War of 1812. Remember, citizens of the United States started calling themselves what? Yeah, it's our country. But you could see we're, the country of the Spaniards, the country of the French, for the most part, the country of the Germans. But look at all these areas. And they don't have countries, or they're parts of multi-ethnic empires. All these different groups are going to be living in here, all of them. And these people who live there, more and more, you'll see it in this era, a relatively new thing in the history of humankind, they want political independence. They're no longer satisfied with living in this multi-ethnic empire. They saw this in the Balkan Peninsula here, with the Romanians, the Bulgarians, Serbia, Greece. They won their independence from the Ottoman Empire. But what's in the Mideast? Places like Syria or Arabia or Basra or Baghdad will want independence. And what divided up? Well, how do you divide people? Well, national identity. That would be start taking more and more and let them have their own self-determination. What's national identity? It's usually language. Language groups. Common language groups. And so here are the Germans, Czechs, Hungarians. They were invaders that came in here. But most of the people here, and here, anybody know what ethnic group they are? They have similar languages. They're not all the same. You see a big difference when you cross here because of alphabet. They're Slavs. These are Slavic peoples. And there's a growing movement for Slavic nationalism. And it's going to be called Pan-Slavism. We need a Slavic state. Pan means all together. A Slavic state. And this is best personified by the Austro-Hungarian, or just simply the Austrian Empire. It became Austria-Hungary in 1868, but it was always called Austria. Most people just colloquially called it Austria. Austrians are ethnic Germans. And so you see in this in red, ethnic Germans. Right here. And it's a few ethnic Germans here. This might have some impact in World War II. And then you have all the other groups. Heck, the empire is massive. There's Italians. We have Ukrainians, Romanians, Slovaks. Slovaks are here. Croatians here. I mean, Poles. I mean, this massive multicultural empire. And within there's also going to be a massive population of Jews who live in this area here. All under the Austrian Empire. Many of these people want to be independent. They want their own country outside of this huge and decaying Austrian Empire. And one country would personify that movement. The brand new and kind of a pariah state called Serbia. And Serbia wanted to unify all of these Slavs in the Austro-Hungarian Empire under their control, aka Greater Serbia. And they would eventually get Greater Serbia. You heard of Yugoslavia? That was Greater Serbia. Yes. Yeah, that's where the term slave comes from. So part of the big slave trade of the 800 to about 1200. So many people were taken from that area. Slav, that's a term slave. English term slave comes from Slavs. And so with that, Greater Serbia. So here's Serbia right here. Really a pariah state. In fact, in 1911, they got rid of their king by throwing him out the window onto an iron fence. That's called defenestration. But so Serbia, therefore, is going to be intriguing in Austria to get the Slavs there to revolt. So Serbia is kind of opposed to Austria, and therefore to Austria, Serbia is the greatest threat. Serbia is trying to intrigue within that empire to get the Austrian or to get the Slavs to revolt. But I don't know if you remember that map. What's the largest Slavic country in the world? And Russia, therefore, which doesn't like Austria, allies themselves with Serbia, the protector of the Serbs. I should add, Russia wants this city right here called Constantinople. They have wanted this since Peter the Great. Forever, they've wanted this. There's always going to be pretty bad relations between Turkey and Russia. And so Russia allies themselves. So you kind of have this, Russia sees themselves as the protector of the Serbs against Austria. Now, who's Austria's only ally? Hungary's part of the empire. Sure. Partially because of slightly common ethnic groups, but also just because there's nobody else. They've allied themselves together. And I think you might see what's going to happen. If something happens between Serbia and Austria, that will get Russia into the war. That will get Germany into the war. Gee, I wonder what's going to happen. So you have all these things happening with nationalism. And this, therefore, the Balkan Peninsula, where many people, and this is actually since 1880, thought something is going to happen here. The Balkan powder keg, they call it. And to give you an idea how much things are going to change, look at the map of Europe in 1914. Look after the war. And it's different today. This was not resolved. And in the 1990s, some of the most horrific violence is going to happen here again. They're going to get a term called ethnic cleansing out of what's going to happen here in the 1990s. And so, speaking of nationalism, we better get to Germany. Germany was a new country. They were created in 1871. Basically, they took a bunch of kingdoms and principalities and lumped them together as an empire. And so they needed to create a common identity. What makes you a German? Just like in the United States, there's this American, this is ours, manifest destiny. Well, they had to create it for Germany too. And so they had this mishmash of myths and legends and religion and stories that they lumped together to make this German identity. What makes you a German? And so the Prussians and the Bavarians don't like each other, but they can say, we're all Germans. And I should add, they still don't really like each other. So my sister-in-law married a Berliner, and I was with him in Munich, the capital of Bavaria. And he made it very clear to me as we got off the train that these are not real Germans in Munich. The real Germans are in Berlin. And then I was informed by somebody in Munich that no, these are not real Germans. The real German, Berlin's not real Germany. The real Germans are in Munich. And I thought, yeah, it's kind of like the United States and North and South, that kind of thing. But so they made up this mythology of that Germans were this special superior race and all of their Germans, and therefore by this common language, we are the ones that everybody is jealous of. The greatest composers and philosophers and scientists are all Germans, and what makes German great. In fact, they made it this thing called Aryan. You might have heard of it. That came about 1870s, 1880s. Now there are Aryans. Aryans are in a name, a very vague name for an ethnic group of European or invaders from here. There's all these invaders that swept through. Germanic invaders came through and settled in South Germany about 300 BC. And then the Vandals and Boston. But they call themselves Aryans. Now there are Aryans. There's actually a country of Aryans. Anyone know what the country of Aryans is? Good guess. Iran means it. But it's made up for the German sake. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed Germans are this superior race. But it fit in with that biological science. Remember the hierarchy of races. Northern Europeans were seen on top. It fit in with that fake science. And therefore, they said this, what makes it so great is our superior civilization which was the proper noun, culture. German culture is superior. Here's Germania on the Rhine River at Koblenz, kind of representing the unification of Germany. And everyone is jealous of German culture. Everyone is jealous. So this was a medal given to German soldiers during the war. And it was supposed to raise their morale, saying you're defending, you're making the sacrifice, German culture. So you've heard like Nazi Germany and the idea about Aryan. He just piggybacked on this fake German nationalism or fake German mythology. And everyone's jealous, and therefore we have enemies on both sides. In fact, Russia's jealous of it, Slavs. The French are jealous of us, and we're surrounded by them. Enemies on all sides. And so here's a great postcard with this idea that we must preserve these areas. And I love this one. This was given to kids. This is during the war. And it's World War I because the Germans would denote wars by the date it starts, 1914. And you'll see right here, it's all these people jealous and attacking Germany at once. It's my little kids. So see, there's Germany. Oh, there's a poor little Germany. And everyone, these are all caricatures as kids attacking them. Anybody know what country that is? France. It's a Sanskrit law from the French Revolution. The French. That's the United States, American Indians. Russia. This is vague Asia. It's, all right. Britain. Vague Arabia. Italy. Vague Africa. Everyone's out to get them. German nationalism. We better get the French nationalism too. So French have been really pushing this nationalism because they lost a war against Prussia, which would become the king of Prussia, become the emperor of Germany back in 1871. And they lost two big pieces of land here called Alsace and Lorraine, two provinces. They were French, they went to Germany. And these would be called the lost provinces. And France is going to gear everything to take back these provinces. And they took the wrong lesson from the war they lost, that the offensive and bravery and a glint of steel off of bayonets are all you needed. So while everybody else is going to dull uniforms, khaki or gray or brown, what are the French doing? They're doubling down on red and navy blue. Those poor French soldiers. So when the war began, they're going to show their courage by wearing these nice brightly colored uniforms and bayonet charges against machine guns. You could probably guess what's going to happen. But this is going to be so much of French pride. So when the war began, what are they going to do? And that leads to alliances. And that will finish tomorrow.